I didn't celebrate prematurely. I waited until the official promotion meeting to smile and say, I'm excited for my raise. But my boss looked at me as if I'd just said something stupid. He chuckled. What raise? You're mistaken. At that moment, I didn't know I had been removed from the list because of a dirty betrayal. But they also didn't know I had prepared for this moment in advance. And I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was leaving with a plan. My name is Lauren Grady. I'm a software engineer originally from a small town in Kansas that most people couldn't find on a map. For the past 3 years, I've been working at Veltrix Labs, a tech startup headquartered in Seattle that specializes in data visualization software. I was their 17th employee. When I joined, the office still had that new paint smell, and everyone ate lunch together at a single table. I'm not the loudest person in the room. Never have been. My parents raised me to believe that actions speak louder than words. And in my experience, that's true everywhere except in tech companies. At Veltrix, I discovered early on that perception often matters more than performance, but I thought I could overcome that by simply being exceptional at my job. For 6 months straight, I had been working overtime, fixing major system bugs that no one else wanted to touch, and training interns who would later praise my patience. I reconstructed our entire back-end logging system after a catastrophic failure during a product demo. I created an elegant solution for a memory leak problem that had been plaguing our flagship product for months. I was the one who volunteered to be on call during holidays so others could spend time with their families. I'm not saying I was perfect. I'm saying I was valuable. And in a company that claimed to reward exceptional talent and dedication, I believed I was due for recognition. The promotion cycle came around, and based on metrics alone, I should have been a shoo-in. My performance reviews were stellar. User feedback for features I'd implemented was overwhelmingly positive. I had single-handedly resolved critical issues that were costing the company thousands in customer support hours. So when my direct manager, Rodney Wallace, mentioned during our one-on-one that I should prepare for good news, I took it as confirmation. The day of the promotion meeting, I wore my lucky navy blazer, the one I'd bought secondhand but had tailored to fit perfectly. I'd even splurged on a professional blowout for my usually unruly curls. I wanted to look the part of someone who was moving up. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in Conference Room C, the one with the view of Elliott Bay. I arrived 5 minutes early, but Rodney and Michelle from HR were already there, along with Brent Coleman, another engineer on my team. Brent was fine. That's the most generous description I can offer. He'd been at Veltrix about a year longer than me, but his contributions were mediocre at best. He had a habit of speaking over others in meetings, especially women, and taking credit for collaborative work. He was also Rodney's golf buddy. Lauren, come in, Michelle said, gesturing to an empty chair. Her smile seemed tight around the edges. We were just getting started. I sat down, noticing that Brent looked unusually smug. He had the expression of someone who knew something I didn't, but I dismissed it. I was focused on maintaining my composure despite the excitement bubbling inside me. So, Rodney began, shuffling some papers in front of him. As you know, we've been evaluating performance across departments for our quarterly promotions and raises. I nodded, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from fidgeting. Brent, Rodney continued, turning to my colleague. Congratulations on your promotion to senior software engineer. Your leadership on the dashboard redesign project was exceptional, and we're pleased to offer you a 15% salary increase effective immediately. I blinked, confusion momentarily clouding my thoughts. The dashboard redesign? That was primarily my work. Brent had contributed maybe 20% of the code at most, and I had documentation to prove it. Thank you, sir, Brent said, reaching across to shake Rodney's hand. I'm honored and excited to take on more responsibility. I waited for Rodney to turn to me next, to offer my promotion. The silence stretched uncomfortably before I realized they were all looking at me expectantly, as if waiting for me to congratulate Brent. I'm excited for my raise as well, I said, attempting to guide the conversation back on track with a small smile. That's when it happened. Rodney looked at me with a mixture of confusion and amusement, as if I told a joke that had fallen flat. Then he chuckled, Not a full laugh, but a dismissive sound that made my stomach drop. What raise? You're mistaken. Lauren, he said, glancing quickly at Michelle, who was suddenly very interested in her tablet. You're not on the promotion list for this quarter. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not on the list? After everything I'd done? There must be some mistake, I said, my voice steady despite the anger beginning to simmer beneath my skin. My performance metrics exceed departmental standards by 43%. I've implemented 3 major features that increased user retention by 26%. I rebuilt the entire logging system after the February crash. Rodney shifted uncomfortably. Those were team efforts, Lauren. And while your contributions are valued, we felt that Brent demonstrated the leadership qualities we're looking for at the senior level. I looked at Brent, who had the audacity to give me a sympathetic smile. You'll get there, Lauren, he said in a tone that made me want to throw my water glass at him. Keep working hard. Keep working hard. I'd been working harder than anyone in the department, including him, especially him. I see, I said simply. Because what else could I say in that moment? I wasn't going to beg or break down. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose my composure. We value your contributions, Lauren, Michelle added, her corporate smile firmly in place. And we hope you'll continue to grow with us at Veltrix. I stood up, gathering my notebook and pen. Thank you for your time, I said, not trusting myself to say anything more. I walked out of the conference room with my head held high, feeling 3 pairs of eyes on my back. I returned to my desk, sat down, and stared at my computer screen for a full minute. The fury inside me was cold and clarifying. This wasn't just about a missed promotion, this was theft, intellectual theft. And I had just watched it happen in real time. But here's what Rodney, Michelle, and especially Brent didn't know. I'd been preparing for this possibility for months. I wasn't paranoid, I was observant. I had noticed how Brent would sidle up to Rodney after presentations I'd given, speaking in low voices. I'd caught him reviewing my code commits after hours, something he never did with other team members. I'd seen the way he would rephrase my ideas in meetings, just differently enough to make them sound like his own. So I had quietly, methodically built my insurance policy. Every email where my contributions were acknowledged, saved to a personal account. Commit logs showing exactly who wrote what code, downloaded and timestamped. Screenshots of Slack conversations where Brent asked me to explain concepts he should have known as a senior engineer, cataloged. Recording of meetings where Brent either dozed off, yes, really, or borrowed my exact phrasing when speaking to leadership. Securely stored, most importantly, I had copies of the code I'd written that Brent had somehow gotten credit for, and in a colossal oversight that would soon prove catastrophic for Veltrix. I had never signed a non-disclosure agreement. It was a clerical error during my onboarding, one that HR had never caught, and one that I had never volunteered to correct. I packed up my desk methodically, placing my few personal items in my backpack. I didn't make a scene. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I simply logged out of my computer, placed my company keycard on top of the keyboard, and walked out. Once home in my small apartment, I opened my laptop and composed a brief, pointed email to Rodney. Subject: Attribution Request. Last chance, Rodney. Today's meeting made it clear that my contributions to Veltrix have been misattributed. I am requesting formal written acknowledgement of my work on the following projects: Dashboard redesign, February-April. Logging system reconstruction, February. Memory optimization protocol, January. I expect your response by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Regards, Lauren Grady. I hit send and waited. The response came faster than I expected. Within 20 minutes, my phone was buzzing with calls from Rodney, Michelle, and even numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail. Text messages followed. Lauren, let's discuss this. Call me back. Rodney, we should talk through your concerns. Are you available for a quick call? Michelle? Hey, what's going on? Rodney seems freaked out. Maria, a fellow engineer and the closest thing I had to a friend at Veltrix, I responded to, none of them. The only communication worth acknowledging would be a formal written response to my email. Anything else was just damage control. What they didn't know was that while they were scrambling to figure out how to manage me, I was preparing my nuclear option. You see, 3 weeks earlier, Veltrix Labs had been acquired by Halcyon Nova, a much larger tech corporation, for just over $10 million. The acquisition hadn't been publicly announced yet, but as part of the technical integration team, I was aware of it, and I knew that Halcyon Nova's Chief Technology Officer, Sierra Blake, was conducting due diligence on Veltrix's intellectual property. At precisely 9 a.m. the next morning, having received no written acknowledgement from Rodney, I sent a comprehensive zip file to Sierra Blake's corporate email. The subject line was simple: Veltrix IP verification. Urgent review required. The file contained irrefutable evidence that the code Brent Coleman had claimed as his own, code that had been a significant factor in Halcyon's valuation of Veltrix, was entirely my work. I included every shred of evidence I had collected: the commit logs, the email chains, the meeting recordings, and most damningly, early drafts of the code from my personal development environment that predated anything in Veltrix's repositories. Then I waited. The first sign that my email had hit its mark came around noon, when several congratulatory LinkedIn posts about Brent's promotion suddenly disappeared. By 3 p.m., rumors were circulating among my former colleagues about an IP issue that had executives locked in the conference room. Maria texted again. OMG, what did you do? Brent's Slack account has been suspended, and Rodney looks like he's about to have a stroke. I didn't respond. Instead, I was updating my resume and portfolio, carefully documenting my actual contributions at Veltrix without violating any confidentiality that might have been implicitly expected, even without an NDA. I wasn't being vindictive. I was simply ensuring that my work would be properly attributed going forward. 2 days later, Brent Coleman's profile disappeared from the Veltrix website. I heard through Maria that he had been escorted from the building by security, his personal items delivered to him later in a cardboard box. Rodney's email arrived the following day. Subject: Attribution request. Lauren. After further review, we acknowledge your substantial contributions to the projects listed in your previous email. We would like to discuss your return to Veltrix in a senior capacity. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss compensation and role details. Regards, Rodney Wallace, Director of Engineering, Veltrix Labs. Too little. Too late. I had already moved on mentally, even if I hadn't yet secured a new position. I replied with a single line: I decline your offer. Please direct any future communication through legal channels. What happened next was unexpected, even to me. Sierra Blake, Halcyon Nova's CTO, reached out directly. Subject: Your submission. Grady, I've reviewed the materials you provided regarding Veltrix's intellectual property. Your documentation was thorough and concerning. I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you directly about this matter and potentially about your future plans. Are you available for a call tomorrow at 10 a.m. PT? Regards, Sierra Blake, Chief Technology Officer, Halcyon Nova. I agreed to the call, unsure of what to expect. Was this a legal intimidation tactic? An attempt to ensure my silence? I prepared for either scenario, reviewing my rights and options. Sierra called precisely at 10 a.m. Her voice was crisp and authoritative, but not unkind. Ms. Grady, thank you for taking my call, she began. I'll get straight to the point. The code you developed at Veltrix is impressive, particularly your approach to the memory optimization issue. What's less impressive is how your contributions were handled by their management team. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. Halcyon Nova is reassessing our acquisition terms with Veltrix in light of this situation, she said. But that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because talent like yours shouldn't be sidelined or erased. I'd like to offer you a position at Halcyon Nova. I hadn't expected this. What kind of position? I asked cautiously. Lead architect for our new data integration platform, she replied without hesitation. Full creative control, a team of your choosing, and equity options. I don't want to invite you back to tech, Ms. Grady. I want you to lead where tech is going. The offer was stunning. More responsibility, more money, and more recognition than I would have received even with the promotion I'd been denied at Veltrix. But I had questions. Why me? You don't know me beyond my code. Sierra's laugh was genuine. Sometimes code tells you everything you need to know about a person, Ms. Grady. Yours is elegant, efficient, and remarkably thoughtful. It solves problems that others don't even recognize yet. And more importantly, you stood up for yourself when it would have been easier to walk away. That's the kind of integrity I want in my leadership team. I took the weekend to consider her offer, and on Monday morning, I accepted. Within 2 weeks, I had relocated to Halcyon Nova's campus in Bellevue, just east of Seattle. My new office had a view of Lake Washington, and my name was on the door. A small detail that shouldn't have mattered, but somehow did. Sierra kept her word about allowing me to build my own team. I specifically sought out engineers who, like me, had been overlooked or underestimated. Women, non-binary individuals, people of color, those who spoke English as a second language, those who didn't fit the typical tech bro mold. I hired based on talent and potential rather than pedigree or personal connections. Within 2 months, my team had developed a prototype for a new data integration platform that caught the attention of Halcyon's CEO. We secured additional funding before we'd even completed our formal presentation. The message was clear. Innovation thrives when diverse perspectives are valued. Meanwhile, Veltrix was struggling. The revised acquisition deal with Halcyon Nova had been less favorable, and rumors of their questionable IP management had made rounds in the industry. They were hemorrhaging talent and clients. Then came a particularly galling LinkedIn post from Veltrix's official account, congratulating women in tech and tagging me among other former female employees. It was a transparent attempt to associate themselves with my now growing reputation in the industry. I responded publicly, "Please don't celebrate what you once tried to silence. True advocacy means giving credit where it's due, not retroactively claiming to support those you undermined." The post was deleted within hours, but screenshots circulated widely. A week later, I received a voicemail from a blocked number. It was Michelle from HR. "Lauren, it's Michelle Thompson from Veltrix. I hope you're doing well. Listen, we've been doing a lot of reflection as a company, and we'd like to rebuild bridges. Would you be open to a conversation about how we might work together in the future? Please call me back when you have a chance." I saved the message in a folder I'd labeled "They Remember" and didn't return the call. There was nothing to discuss. What Michelle didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been busy securing my ultimate leverage. Through Halcyon Nova's investment arm, I'd quietly acquired a controlling interest in the infrastructure provider that hosted all of Veltrix's cloud services. It wasn't personal, it was just good business. The provider offered services that complemented Halcyon's portfolio, and my intimate knowledge of Veltrix's technical needs made the acquisition particularly strategic. 3 months after leaving Veltrix, I walked into their offices again, this time as the chairperson of their primary infrastructure provider, there to negotiate their service contract renewal. The look on Michelle's face when I entered the conference room was worth every late night I'd ever worked. "Ms. Grady," she stammered, rising halfway from her seat. "We weren't expecting you personally." "Clearly," I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Shall we proceed with the contract discussion?" The new terms I presented were fair but firm and included a 300% price increase compared to their previous contract. It was the market rate for companies of their size, but a significant departure from the preferential pricing they had previously enjoyed. "This is highway robbery," Rodney sputtered, his face reddening. "We've been loyal customers for years." "This is business," I corrected him calmly. "Your loyalty was to the previous management. I'm offering current market rates with guarantees that exceed industry standards. You're welcome to explore other options, of course, but migration would take approximately 6 weeks, during which time your service levels would be unpredictable." Michelle, to her credit, recognized the untenable position they were in. Veltrix couldn't afford 6 weeks of service disruption, not with their reputation already damaged. She signed the new contract with a shaking hand. I gathered my documents, nodded once to the room, and left without shaking hands or looking back. It wasn't about revenge, it was about consequences. Actions have them, and inactions do too. 1 year after the promotion meeting that had changed everything, I was invited to be a keynote speaker at the Pacific Northwest Tech Summit. My presentation on ethical leadership in software development drew the largest audience of the conference. As I concluded my remarks and prepared to take questions, I noticed a familiar face in the second row, Michelle Thompson. According to the conference program, she was now an organizational culture consultant and would be giving a talk later that afternoon on building inclusive tech teams. The irony was almost too perfect. The moderator called on her for the first question. "Lauren," she began, stumbling slightly over my name. "Your journey is inspiring. What advice would you give to companies looking to retain top female talent in tech?" I smiled, making direct eye contact with her. "First, learn their names correctly. It's Lauren, not Liureen." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the audience. "Second, recognize that talent retention isn't about pizza parties or motivational posters. It's about attribution, compensation, and advancement. If you claim to value diversity but your leadership doesn't reflect it, you don't actually value diversity, you fetishize it." Michelle's face flushed as she nodded and sat down quickly. I concluded my keynote with words that I hoped would resonate beyond that room. I used to be someone waiting to be included on the list. Now I write the list myself. The applause was thunderous. But I wasn't doing this for applause. I was doing it because somewhere in that audience was another quiet, hard-working person who needed to hear that their work mattered, that they deserved recognition, and that sometimes you have to create your own justice when the system fails you. As I left the stage, Sierra Blake was waiting in the wings. She gave me a knowing smile. "Powerful close," she said. "Ready for Phase 2? Phase 2 was our expansion. Halcyon Nova was spinning off my division into a separate entity. With me as CEO and Sierra as chairperson of the board, we had secured $50 million in Series A funding, and our data integration platform was already being implemented by 3 Fortune 500 companies. "More than ready," I replied. In the lobby afterward, I was approached by a young woman clutching a notebook. She looked nervous but determined. "Ms. Grady, I'm sorry to bother you, but your talk really resonated with me. I'm in a similar situation at my company. Doing the work but not getting the credit, I don't know what to do." I could have given her platitudes about persistence or working harder. Instead, I gave her my card. "Document everything," I told her quietly. "And when you're ready for a change, call me. We're always looking for people who know their worth." She took the card with wide eyes. "Thank you, I will." As I walked away, I thought about how different things might have been if someone had given me that advice 3 years earlier. But then, I wouldn't be who I am now, someone who not only survived a betrayal, but transformed it into an opportunity. That night, I received an email from Rodney Wallace. The subject line read, "Apology long overdue." I hovered my cursor over the delete button, then decided against it. Whatever he had to say, I would read it, not because I needed his apology, but because I had earned the right to hear it. The email was lengthy, full of excuses thinly veiled as explanations. But its conclusion was sincere enough. "I failed as a leader, and you paid the price for that failure. The success you've achieved since leaving Veltrix proves that the loss was entirely ours. I won't ask for forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that your work has transformed how I approach management. Your name is mentioned in every discussion about attribution and recognition at Veltrix now." I replied with 2 words. "Thank you." Not for the apology, but for finally acknowledging what I had known all along, that my work had value, that I had value. It was a small victory, but those add up over time. 6 months later, my company, NoVeg Systems, had grown to 60 employees. We'd moved into our own office space in downtown Seattle, and our product was revolutionizing how companies integrated and visualized their data. I had a corner office with a view of Puget Sound, but I rarely used it, preferring to work alongside my team in our open collaboration space. Brent Coleman, I heard, had struggled to find another position in Seattle's tech scene. The story of what had happened at Veltrix had circulated widely, though often in whispers rather than explicit warnings. Last I heard, he'd relocated to a smaller market where his reputation might not follow him so closely. As for me, I no longer needed to worry about being left off lists. I was making my own opportunities now, and creating space for others to do the same, every quarter. I personally reviewed the contributions of each team member, ensuring that credit was given where it was due. Promotions were based on documented impact, not on who spoke the loudest in meetings or who played golf with the boss. On the anniversary of my departure from Veltrix, I received a bouquet of flowers at my office. The card simply read, "To writing your own lists. S.B." Sierra Blake, my mentor and now friend, had remembered. I placed the flowers on the conference table in our main workspace. A reminder that recognition doesn't always have to be fought for. Sometimes it comes from those who truly see your value. That evening, as I prepared for a board meeting, my assistant handed me a folder. "The final acquisition papers," she said with a smile. "Just needs your signature." Inside was the documentation for Novedge's acquisition of a small but promising startup focused on AI-driven data analysis. The founder was the young woman I'd met at the conference a year earlier. She had taken my advice, documented everything, and then built something remarkable of her own. I signed the papers, completing a circle that had begun with my own dismissal and now ended with my empowerment of another overlooked talent. This wasn't just business, it was justice of a sort. Not the vengeful kind that leaves you hollow, but the restorative kind that builds something better from the wreckage of what was broken. The next morning, I stood before my team to announce our new acquisition and the talented individuals who would be joining us. As I spoke about the importance of recognizing innovation regardless of its source, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass wall of our office. I barely recognized the confident woman staring back at me, the woman who now wrote the lists instead of hoping to be included on them. 3 years after that fateful promotion meeting, I returned to Veltrix's building, not to visit my former employer, but because Halcyon Nova had acquired the entire property after Veltrix downsized to a smaller location across town. The irony wasn't lost on me as I walked through the lobby, now bearing Halcyon's logo where Veltrix's had once been. I was there for a meeting with Sierra and our executive team, planning the next phase of our expansion. As I waited for the elevator, a familiar figure approached. Michelle Thompson. "Lauren," she said, her surprise evident. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm here for a meeting," I replied neutrally. "Do you work in this building now?" She nodded. "I'm consulting for one of the startups on the 4th floor. Organizational culture development." There was an awkward pause before she added, "Your company is doing amazing things. I follow your progress in the industry news." The elevator arrived, and we both stepped in. As the doors closed, she turned to me. "I've wanted to apologize to you for a long time," she said quietly. "What happened at Veltrix, with your promotion, with Brent, I should have spoken up. I knew it wasn't right." I studied her face, searching for sincerity and finding it mixed with regret. "Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious after all this time. "Fear," she admitted. "Fear of rocking the boat, of being labeled difficult, of losing my own position. It's not an excuse, but it's the truth." The elevator stopped at the 4th floor. Before stepping out, Michelle handed me a business card. "If you ever want to have coffee and talk about anything, I'd welcome the chance." I took the card, not making any promises. As the doors closed between us, I realized that I no longer felt anger toward her, just a distant sadness for the culture that had made her complicity seem like her only option. When I reached the conference room, Sierra was already there, reviewing documents. She looked up as I entered. "Everything okay? You look thoughtful." "Just ran into a ghost from Veltrix," I said, taking my seat at the table. It made me realize how far I've come. She smiled knowingly. From having your name kept off a list to being the person everyone wants on their cap table, it's been quite a journey. It had indeed. My team at NoVeg was now over 100 strong. Our products were industry-leading, and I had recently been featured on the cover of Tech Innovators magazine. The headline had read, "Lauren Grady, Rewriting the Code of Leadership in Tech." As our executive team filed in and the meeting began, I found myself only half listening to the discussion about market expansion strategies. My mind was on a different kind of expansion, the growth that comes from standing up for yourself, from refusing to be diminished, from transforming a moment of betrayal into a catalyst for change. The following week, I did something unexpected. I called Michelle and agreed to coffee. Not because I needed closure, but because I was curious about her journey since Veltrix. We met at a small cafe midway between our offices. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as we sat down with our drinks. "I honestly didn't think you would." 3 years ago, I wouldn't have, I admitted. But I'm not the same person I was then. "Neither am I," she said, stirring her latte absently. "After what happened with you and then the Halcyon deal going sideways, I started questioning everything about how we operated. I left Veltrix 6 months after you did. To become a culture consultant," I noted, unable to keep a hint of irony from my voice. She had the grace to look embarrassed. "I know how that must sound to you, but I genuinely wanted to help companies avoid the mistakes we made, the mistakes I was complicit in. My entire practice is built around ethical management and proper attribution of work." "And does it work?" I asked. "Do companies actually listen?" "Some do," she said, "especially after they've been burned by losing top talent. Others just want the appearance of caring without doing the actual work." She paused. "I reference your story sometimes, anonymously, of course. It's a powerful example of what happens when organizations fail their most valuable contributors." I was surprised by her candor. "You could have just pretended it never happened, rewritten your own history. Like Rodney and Brent tried to do?" She shook her head. "No, I needed to own my part in it. That's the only way anything ever changes." We talked for nearly 2 hours, not as friends exactly, but as two professionals who had experienced the same toxic culture from different positions within it. As we prepared to leave, Michelle hesitated. "There's something I've always wondered," she said. "How did you know to prepare, to keep all that documentation? Most people wouldn't have been so thorough." I considered my answer carefully. I didn't start out planning to build a case. I started out just trying to protect myself from feeling crazy when my work was attributed to others. The documentation was initially just for me, proof that I wasn't imagining things. It only became leverage later. She nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I tell the companies I work with now. By the time someone is building a case against you, you've already failed them in fundamental ways." As we parted ways, I realized that this conversation had given me something I hadn't known I needed: context. Michelle had been wrong not to speak up, but she had been operating within a system designed to discourage exactly that kind of courage. The true failure had been institutional, not just individual. Back at my office, I found a message waiting from Sierra. She wanted to discuss a new initiative, a mentorship program specifically designed for overlooked talent in tech. She wanted me to lead it. I smiled as I read her proposal. This was why I had chosen to work with her. Why I had accepted her offer when I could have gone anywhere after the Veltrix debacle. Sierra didn't just talk about change, she created structures to make it happen. That evening, as I prepared for a speaking engagement at a Women in Tech conference, I received an email notification that made me pause. It was a LinkedIn connection request from Brent Coleman. Out of curiosity, I checked his profile. He was now working for a small development shop in Portland, several steps down in prestige from Veltrix. His headline described him as team-oriented software developer. I neither accepted nor declined the request. Some connections aren't worth maintaining, even digitally. At the conference the next day, I spoke about resilience and self-advocacy in tech. During the Q&A session, a woman in the back raised her hand. What would you say to managers who want to create truly inclusive teams? She asked. How can we make sure we're not perpetuating the problems you experienced? Listen more than you speak, I answered without hesitation. Look for the quiet contributors, the ones solving problems without fanfare. Documentation doesn't lie. Check commit logs, project notes, meeting minutes. And most importantly, create an environment where people don't have to fight to be recognized for their work in the first place. Afterward, several attendees approached me with their own stories of being overlooked or having their work attributed to others. I listened to each one, recognizing the pattern that had shaped my own experience. But I also recognized something else. Each of these women was still in the fight, still showing up, still creating despite the barriers. That night, I drafted an email to Sierra about expanding our mentorship initiative. What if we created an incubator specifically for projects led by those who had been sidelined in their previous roles? What if we actively sought out the overlooked innovators and gave them the resources to build what they'd been envisioning all along? It was late, but Sierra responded almost immediately. I love it. Let's talk details tomorrow. As I closed my laptop, I thought about how far I'd come from that conference room at Veltrix, from the moment when Rodney's chuckle had cut through my expectations. That day, I had felt powerless. Now, I was creating power, not just for myself, but for others who had been in my position. 6 months later, our incubator launched with 5 projects selected from over 300 applications. Each was led by someone with a story similar to mine. Brilliant work overlooked, credit misattributed, advancement blocked. But each also had something else in common. They had documented everything, created irrefutable evidence of their contributions, and refused to fade quietly into the background. At the launch event, I stood on stage looking out at the faces of these creators, determined, resilient, finally seen. Behind them sat investors, industry leaders, and tech journalists, all there to witness what happens when overlooked talent is finally given its due. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter. I told the audience, not just for these 5 incredible projects, but for our industry as a whole. Today, we start writing a different kind of list, one that recognizes innovation wherever it emerges, regardless of who creates it or how loudly they promote themselves. The applause was gratifying, but it was the expressions on the faces of our incubator participants that moved me most. The look of people who were finally being recognized for exactly who they were and what they could create. After the event, as the crowd mingled and networked, Sierra joined me by the window overlooking the Seattle skyline. You've created something remarkable here, she said, something that will outlast both of us. We created it, I corrected her. I wouldn't be here if you hadn't seen my potential when Veltrix couldn't, or wouldn't. True, she acknowledged with a smile. But you're the one who was prepared when opportunity knocked. That meeting with Rodney and Michelle could have ended very differently if you hadn't documented everything. I looked out at the skyline, the lights of Seattle glittering against the darkening sky. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if they had given me that promotion. I admitted. I might still be there, working late nights, solving their problems, never knowing what I was capable of building on my own. Sierra nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best places we'll ever go. It was true. The betrayal at Veltrix had been painful, humiliating even. But it had also been liberating. It had forced me to recognize my own value when others wouldn't. The following month, I received an unexpected email from Rodney Wallace. The subject line read simply, Veltrix closing. The message was brief. Veltrix Labs was shutting down operations. The company had never fully recovered from the revised Halcyon deal and subsequent talent exodus. Their remaining assets were being acquired by a competitor, and their office space would be vacated by the end of the quarter. I felt no satisfaction at this news, only a distant acknowledgement that companies, like people, eventually face the consequences of their choices. Veltrix had created a culture where taking credit mattered more than creating value. And ultimately, that wasn't sustainable. I forwarded the email to Sierra with a single question. Should we reach out to their engineering team? Her response was immediate. Already on it. Interviews scheduled for next week. That was Sierra, always 3 steps ahead, always thinking about talent acquisition even in someone else's downfall. Two of Veltrix's engineers eventually joined Noveg. Neither had been there during my time, but they brought valuable institutional knowledge and seemed genuinely excited about our company culture. During their onboarding, I made a point of explaining our attribution policies. At Noveg, your work will always be recognized as yours. I told them, we succeed together, but individual contributions are never erased or reassigned. It's non-negotiable. They exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their previous experience. Later, one of them confided that this policy alone had been the deciding factor in accepting our offer over another. As Noveg continued to grow, I found myself increasingly in the public eye. I was invited to speak at major tech conferences, profiled in industry publications, and asked to advise on diversity initiatives at other companies. I accepted these opportunities selectively, focusing on those that allowed me to advocate for structural changes in how tech companies evaluate and promote talent. At one such event, I found myself on a panel with 3 other tech executives, including the CEO of a company known for its aggressive, hyper-competitive culture. During the Q&A, an audience member asked about imposter syndrome and how to overcome it. The CEO jumped in first. In my experience, the people worried about imposter syndrome should be worried, he said with a laugh that reminded me uncomfortably of Rodney. The real innovators are too busy creating to worry about whether they belong. When it was my turn to respond, I leaned toward my microphone. I respectfully disagree, I said, my voice calm but firm. Imposter syndrome isn't a personal failing. It's often a rational response to systemic issues. When you work in environments where credit is routinely misattributed, where certain voices are amplified while others are silenced, doubting your place isn't irrational. It's a logical reaction to inconsistent feedback. The audience was silent, waiting for me to continue. The question shouldn't be how individuals can overcome imposter syndrome, I said. It should be how organizations can create cultures where people aren't made to feel like imposters in the first place, where contribution is valued over presentation, where quiet competence isn't overlooked in favor of loud confidence. The applause that followed told me I had struck a chord. After the panel, a line of attendees waited to speak with me, many sharing their own experiences of being overlooked or having their work attributed to others. That night, I called my parents in Kansas. They had followed my career with pride, even if they didn't always understand the technical details of what I did. My father, a high school mathematics teacher, had always emphasized the importance of integrity above achievement. I read about your panel today, he said when he answered. Your mother showed me the live stream. What did you think? I asked, suddenly feeling like a schoolgirl seeking approval. I think you've become exactly who you were meant to be, he replied, his voice warm with pride. Standing up not just for yourself, but for others who can't yet stand for themselves. His words stayed with me as I continued building Noveg. We were approaching our 2nd anniversary as a company, now with over 200 employees and offices in Seattle, Austin, and Toronto. Our products were industry-leading, and our company culture was frequently cited as a model for inclusive innovation. Then came an opportunity I hadn't anticipated. Halcyon Nova was spinning off its enterprise software division, and Sierra wanted me to lead it as CEO. It would mean stepping away from Noveg, the company I had built from scratch, but it would also mean a platform to implement my vision on a much larger scale. Why me? I asked Sierra when she presented the offer. It was an echo of our first conversation years earlier. Her answer was similarly echoed. Because you see what others miss, in code and in people. This division needs someone who can reimagine what enterprise software should be and how the teams creating it should operate. I took a week to consider the offer, discussing it with my leadership team at Noveg and spending long hours walking along Seattle's waterfront, weighing the decision. In the end, I accepted with one condition: that the new company would absorb our incubator program and expand it. The transition was announced at Halcyon's annual leadership summit. As I stood on stage beside Sierra, accepting the role that would have seemed impossible to me just a few years earlier, I scanned the audience. In the third row, I spotted Michelle Thompson. She gave me a small nod of acknowledgement, which I returned. Later, at the reception, she approached me. "Congratulations, Lauren," she said sincerely. "If anyone deserves this opportunity, it's you." "Thank you," I replied. Then, making a decision in the moment, I added, "We'll be looking for advisors on organizational culture for the new company. Would you be interested in submitting a proposal?" Her surprise was evident. "You'd consider working with me after everything that happened at Veltrix?" "The past is instructive, not definitive," I said. "You've spent years trying to prevent what happened to me from happening to others. That expertise has value." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, more recognition that growth was possible, that people could learn from their mistakes if they were willing to acknowledge them. Michelle had done that work. Rodney and Brent, as far as I knew, had not. The new company, which we named Axiom Systems, launched 6 months later. Our mission statement included an explicit commitment to attribution and recognition. We believe that innovation thrives when every contribution is valued and every contributor is seen. On the day of our official launch, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Thank you for the lesson." It was from Brent Coleman. "Lauren," he wrote, "I've started and deleted this email a dozen times over the years. Nothing I can say will undo what happened at Veltrix, and I won't insult you by trying. But I want you to know that watching your success has forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself and how I built my career. I'm trying to be better, giving credit explicitly, mentoring junior developers, advocating for those whose voices aren't being heard. It's not atonement, it's just the right thing to do. Congratulations on your new role at Axiom. The industry is better with you leading in it." I read the email twice, unsure how to feel about it. There was a time when I would have deleted it without response, or perhaps sent back something cutting. But that Lauren, the one burning with righteous anger, had evolved into someone focused on creating change rather than settling scores. I replied simply, "Thank you for your note. The acknowledgement matters." Because it did matter, not for my ego or for any sense of vindication, but because it represented a small shift in the culture I was working to change. If Brent Coleman, who had once built his career on claiming others' work, was now actively attributing contributions, then perhaps the ripples of my experience were spreading further than I knew. 5 years after that promotion meeting at Veltrix, I found myself back in Conference Room C, now part of Halcyon Nova's Seattle campus, for a very different kind of meeting. We were interviewing candidates for our expanded incubator program, and I was there to meet with a young engineer whose application had particularly impressed me. As I waited, I glanced out at Elliott Bay, the same view I had stared at while absorbing the shock of Rodney's dismissive chuckle. So much had changed since then. I had changed. The door opened, and my assistant showed in a woman in her mid-20s, clearly nervous but making an effort to appear confident. "Ms. Chen, thank you for coming in today," I said, rising to shake her hand. "I'm Lauren Grady." "It's an honor to meet you, Ms. Grady," she replied. "Your work and your story have been inspirational to me." We sat down, and I gestured to her portfolio on the table between us. "Your proposal is impressive. Tell me more about how you developed the concept." She began explaining her project, a platform for collaborative coding that automatically tracked and attributed each contributor's work, making the development process transparent and equitable. As she spoke, her initial nervousness fell away, replaced by genuine passion for the problem she was solving. "It came from my own experience," she admitted. "At my current company, I've had ideas and code attributed to more senior developers. I started documenting everything, just like you did. But I thought, what if the documentation was built into the system itself? What if attribution wasn't something you had to fight for, but was automatically preserved?" I nodded, recognizing the seed of something potentially transformative in her concept. "And if a company adopted your platform? They'd be making a commitment to transparency," she said firmly. You couldn't use our system and still play games with who gets credit for what work. It would be like having receipts for every contribution, automatically generated and impossible to dispute. By the end of our conversation, I was convinced that Ms. Chen wasn't just creating a product, she was creating a solution to a systemic problem that had affected countless people like us. I offered her a spot in our incubator program on the spot. As she left, visibly trying to contain her excitement, I thought about how her innovation had grown directly from her experience of inequity, just as Noveg had grown from mine. We weren't just creating technology, we were creating antidotes to the poisons we had survived. That evening, I attended a gala celebrating women in leadership across industries. As a keynote speaker, I was seated at the head table alongside CEOs, politicians, and philanthropists. The woman beside me was the newly appointed dean of a prestigious engineering school. "I've been following your career with interest," she said as we waited for the program to begin. "Particularly your emphasis on attribution in tech development. We're implementing similar principles in our academic programs." "How so?" I asked, genuinely curious. "We're revamping how we structure group projects," she explained. "Historically, collaborative work has often disadvantaged certain students, particularly women and minorities, who contribute significantly but don't receive proportional credit. We're creating evaluation systems that track individual contributions more accurately." "That's exactly the kind of structural change that's needed," I said. "Not just in industry, but in the educational pipeline that feeds it." We exchanged contact information, promising to explore potential collaborations between Axiom and her institution. It was another example of how the ripples were spreading. From my individual experience to company policy to industry practice to educational reform. When it was time for my speech, I approached the podium with a quiet confidence that would have been unimaginable to the Lauren who had walked out of Veltrix that day, fighting back tears of frustration. 6 years ago, I began. I sat in a meeting where my work was attributed to someone else, where my contributions were erased with a chuckle and a dismissive comment. It was a small moment in many ways, the kind of moment that happens in conference rooms across the world every day, usually without consequences for those responsible. The room was silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on me. But that moment changed everything for me, I continued. Not because I was special, but because I was prepared. I had documented my work, preserved evidence of my contributions, created an irrefutable record of my value. When the system failed me, I had the receipts. There were knowing nods throughout the audience. Since then, I've built companies where that kind of erasure isn't possible, where attribution is automatic and recognition is based on contribution rather than confidence. But individual companies aren't enough. We need to transform how we think about credit and recognition across our entire industry, across all industries. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Tonight, I'm announcing the launch of the Attribution Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to creating and promoting systems that ensure fair recognition of work across sectors. We'll develop open-source tools, advocate for policy changes, and provide resources for individuals experiencing attribution theft. Because no one should have to choose between doing great work and receiving credit for it. The applause was immediate and sustained. As I returned to my seat, messages were already appearing on my phone, offers of support, partnership opportunities, volunteers willing to help. Later that night, as I reviewed the initial responses to the Attribution Initiative announcement, I received a text from Sierra. "From a single meeting to a movement, remarkable what can grow from adversity when it falls on the right ground." She was right. That painful meeting at Veltrix had planted a seed that had grown into something far larger than a personal vendetta or even a successful career. It had become a mission to change the very culture that had once nearly silenced me. 7 years after Rodney's dismissive chuckle, I was invited to give the commencement address at my alma mater, the University of Washington. As I stood before thousands of graduating students and their families, I thought about what I wished someone had told me when I was sitting where they were now. "Your work has value," I told them. "Not because of who notices it or who praises it, but because you did it." In a world that often confuses confidence for competence and volume for value, Remember that real impact speaks for itself, but only if you make sure it's heard. I shared my story, not to dwell on past injustice, but to illustrate how moments of adversity can become catalysts for transformation. I spoke about the importance of documentation, of evidence, of creating an undeniable record of one's contributions. But I also spoke about the responsibility that comes with success. If you find yourself in a position of power, I said, use it to build systems where credit is automatic and recognition is equitable. Be the kind of leader you needed when you were just starting out. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me, clutching her newly received diploma. "Ms. Grady," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Your speech really resonated with me. I've already experienced what you described, having my ideas attributed to others, being talked over in meetings. How do I make sure it doesn't define my career the way it could have defined yours?" I looked at her, bright, capable, full of potential, and saw echoes of myself. But I also saw someone entering a world that was, slowly but surely, becoming more equitable because people like me had refused to accept the status quo. "Document everything," I told her, echoing the advice I had given so many times. "Build your evidence base, but also find your allies, people who will amplify your voice when you speak, who will redirect credit back to you when it's misattributed, and when you succeed, not if, but when. Become that ally for someone else." She nodded earnestly, and I could see the advice taking root, another ripple spreading outward. That night, I received an email from Rodney Wallace. It had been years since our last communication, and I was surprised to see his name in my inbox. "Lauren," he wrote, "I saw your commencement address online. It was powerful, especially coming from someone who experienced firsthand how badly leadership can fail. I've spent years reflecting on what happened at Veltrix, and I want you to know that it changed me too. I now teach business ethics at a community college, using my own failures as case studies in what not to do. Your success has been the best possible rebuke to my mistakes. Thank you for turning what I broke into something remarkable." I sat with his message for a long time, feeling neither anger nor vindication, but a quiet acknowledgement that change was possible, not just in systems and institutions, but in individuals too. 10 years after that fateful promotion meeting, I stood on stage at the Global Tech Summit, introducing the latest evolution of the Attribution Initiative, now a worldwide movement with implementations in companies, universities, and research institutions across 6 continents. Our open-source attribution tools had been downloaded millions of times, and our advocacy had led to new industry standards for recognizing contributions in collaborative work. As I looked out at the audience, I saw not just tech executives and engineers, but educators, researchers, artists, and activists, all people who understood the fundamental importance of having their work recognized as their own. "A decade ago," I said, "I was told I wasn't on the list. Today, we're rewriting how those lists are created in the first place. Attribution shouldn't be a battle. It should be a baseline expectation in any collaborative environment." The applause was gratifying, but what moved me more were the stories people shared afterward. Stories of how our tools and advocacy had changed their professional trajectories, had given them evidence when they needed it most, had helped them receive recognition that would have otherwise been denied. A senior engineer from a major tech company approached me during the reception. "Your work saved my career," she said simply. 3 years ago, I was in exactly your position, watching someone else take credit for my code. But because of your tools, I had irrefutable evidence. I not only got the promotion I deserved, but the person who tried to claim my work was held accountable." These were the moments that mattered most to me now. Not the accolades or the career success, but the knowledge that I had helped create a world where fewer people would experience what I had, where the quiet contributors wouldn't be overlooked in favor of the loudest voices in the room. Later that evening, as the event wound down, I found a quiet corner to check my messages. Among them was a notification that Michelle Thompson had posted about the summit on LinkedIn, tagging me in a thoughtful reflection on how the Attribution Initiative was transforming organizational culture. Michelle and I had developed an unexpected professional relationship over the years. She had become one of our most effective advocates, using her position as an organizational consultant to implement our attribution systems in companies across the country. Her first-hand experience with the toxic culture at Veltrix had made her a powerful voice for change. I responded to her post with a brief comment. "Thank you for being part of this journey. It takes all of us, those who were overlooked and those who did the overlooking, to create lasting change." As I prepared to leave the venue, Sierra Blake appeared at my side. Now in her 60s, she remained a formidable presence in the tech world and my most steadfast ally. "Another successful summit," she said, linking her arm through mine as we walked toward the exit. Though I still remember when all of this was just an idea born from a terrible meeting. I smiled at the understatement. From a chuckle and a dismissal to a global initiative, who would have thought? "I would have," she said firmly. "The moment I read your email with all that evidence, I knew you were someone who wouldn't just accept injustice, you would transform it." Outside, the Seattle night was clear, the stars visible despite the city lights. We paused on the steps of the convention center, looking out at the skyline that had been the backdrop to this entire journey. "What's next?" Sierra asked. "You've changed how attribution works in tech, in academia, in creative fields. Where does the initiative go from here?" I considered her question carefully. "Early education," I said finally. "We need to teach children from the beginning that their ideas matter, that their contributions have value, that they deserve to be heard and recognized. We need to build these principles into education from the ground up." Sierra nodded approvingly. "Always thinking ahead, that's why you've been so effective." As we parted ways, I reflected on how completely my life had been transformed by that single dismissive moment a decade earlier. The promotion I had been denied at Veltrix would have meant a modest salary increase and a slightly more impressive title. What I had built instead was a movement that was changing how work was valued across industries. Back in my office the next morning, I found an invitation waiting in my inbox. The World Economic Forum wanted me to lead a special session on equitable attribution in the age of artificial intelligence and collaborative knowledge creation. It was yet another opportunity to expand the reach of our work, to ensure that as technology evolved, the human values of fairness and recognition evolved with it. As I accepted the invitation, I thought about the young woman I'd been, the quiet engineer who believed that excellent work would speak for itself. She hadn't been entirely wrong. Excellent work does have inherent value. But she hadn't yet understood that systems are designed to amplify certain voices and silence others. That without deliberate intervention, even the most brilliant contributions can be erased or reassigned. That young woman had gone into a promotion meeting expecting recognition and received dismissal instead. But from that dismissal had grown something far more significant than any promotion could have been. A commitment to ensuring that no one else would have their work stolen with a chuckle and a wave of the hand. The Lauren who walked into that meeting had been waiting to be included on someone else's list. The Lauren who walked out, hurt but resolute, defeated but not destroyed, had begun the journey toward writing her own. And now, a decade later, I was doing exactly that, writing the lists that recognized contribution based on merit rather than politics, that valued substance over style, that ensured credit went where it was due. In my final keynote at the summit, I had ended with words that summed up this journey. I used to be someone waiting to have my name included on the list. Now I write the list myself. But the truth was even more profound. I wasn't just writing the lists anymore. I was reimagining what those lists could be and who they could include. I was transforming the very systems that had once tried to diminish me. And that transformation, from overlooked to essential, from silence to influential, was the most powerful response I could have ever given to Rodney's dismissive chuckle all those years ago. Not revenge, not even success, but lasting, meaningful change.